Hi, this is Katie Martin of Harvest Goods Company. I'm going to be teaching you how to stitch the cozy A-frame pattern. All you're going to need is one of our kits or patterns from the shop, link below. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. If you bought a kit from us, you have absolutely everything you need. And if you only bought our pattern, no worries. Just make sure you have all of your materials ready. And let's go ahead and lay those things out. We've got an embroidery hoop, floss, as well as a needle. The needle is on the back of the floss card if you have the kit. Fabric, the instruction booklet, which you can print out if you bought the pattern, as well as the printout page. And you're also going to need scissors and a heat erasable pen. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and trace on our pattern. My favorite way to do it is just laying it down flat and laying my fabric directly over the pattern with the pattern right in the middle. You can also do this over a window or over a light box if you can't see super well. This does not have to be perfect. You will see that I do not trace this perfectly at all, so don't stress. And I'm also using a friction heat erasable pen. I do love these pens so much because if you do mess up your tracing, you can just put a hairdryer on them, erase what you messed up, and start over. So go ahead and trace your pattern on. So next we're going to go ahead and load our hoop. This is super simple. So you've got your pattern traced. You can keep that piece of paper that you use to trace the pattern on to use again and again, which is why we include it. And you can go ahead and lay your fabric on top of the circle, the wooden circle that has no hardware on it. Make sure it's centered as you like, and then go ahead and pop the outer rim on to the inner rim. This will be a little bit tough, especially if you have one of our kits, because these hoops are very hardy, but don't worry, you're not going to break it. They're actually so great and keep hold of your project so well. Get the hoop loaded and make sure that when you are all done, that the fabric is totally tight, and when you tap on it, it should sound like a drum. That's how you know it's tight enough. Once you have your hoop loaded and you're happy with how tight your fabric is, you can go back with your heat erasable pen and add in any little details you felt like you left out. Here I'm just tracing all the way to the edge of the fabric where the fabric meets the hoop, because I will show you how to stitch all the way to the edge if you want to. If you don't want to mess with the special style of stitching to get it all the way to the edge, you could stitch in the next size up hoop. That would be totally fine as well. Or you could just stitch on the inside of the hoop. So go ahead, once you're ready, grab your needle and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to take you step by step through the pattern so you can also read along while I'm going through it. So before moving any further, I just wanted to give credit to the designer of this kit. Though I did stitch it, Leana of May We Fly designed this. It's in her calendar for this year, which is so adorable. I will link her down below. She makes the most beautiful paper and home goods. Go ahead, check her out, enjoy her work hopefully as much as I do, and let's get started. We're going to go ahead and start off by using 6 strands of our dark green floss. If you want more details on exactly what color, exactly how many strands, what goes where, make sure you buy the kit and the pattern. This is more just for you to see the instructions played out. So if you want more information, make sure to look at your booklet. Load up our needle and tie our thread and get started. So we're going to start by stitching the evergreen, and how I do this is I'm using little angled stitches starting from the outside edge working inward. We're going to use long and short stitch, which just means that your stitches are going to overlap to fill this space going in the same general direction. The fun part about these trees is that your stitches don't need to be perfectly smooth, anything at all like that to look really cute. Actually, the more texture they have, the better, so go wild. But if you got the kit, make sure you're not wasting tons of floss, because we have lots of work to do with this green floss. So be conservative. Don't jump all around the place, but go ahead and add a bunch of textures. The stitches can go in slightly different directions. That makes it look a little more realistic. So once you've got your outer edge stitched, go ahead and, following the same idea, stitch the inner portion of this tree. If you look closely at the photos that I gave you in the patterns, you'll see that the stitches kind of come to a point in the middle and start to turn down. This is just to look closer to a real tree. So fill up this space with your long and short stitches, but know that they can be pretty messy, pretty chaotic, I guess, because that adds even more texture to the tree. So once you finish this tree, go ahead and tie off, do the other two evergreens. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I get my stitches all the way up to the edge of the hoop. Watch the angle in which my needle goes in the fabric. So instead of going straight down, I'm actually tucking it in between the hoop and the fabric. This can be a little bit tricky, and you definitely don't want to pull too hard because it will make your fabric pucker around the edges. Instead of going straight down, I'm going in at an angle, and you just go ahead and use long and short stitch to fill in the whole area of that tree. And that's how you do all of the little skinny trees. And again, here's me just using long and short stitch to fill in this area on the little trees. And this is the exact technique that you use to fill in the other trees left in the piece. Super therapeutic. It's something nice to just curl up and kind of do thoughtlessly. So go ahead and stitch all of your tree trunks. Okay, so you've got your trunks stitched, and we're going to go ahead and stitch the pine needles. These are super simple. They're just straight stitches, all stitched right beside each other. And I like to start on the outer edge of the needles and then stitch them towards the trunk. And you can see that they're all kind of angled towards each other, but they're not necessarily all meeting at the exact same point. They're all meeting very close together, but again, they don't all go in the exact same place. So you can go ahead and add as many straight stitches to this as you like till you think it looks nice and full, and then your trees are done. Now we are going to go ahead and start stitching the siding. Here I am stitching the small guidelines in the siding and the lines that kind of differentiate the panels in the siding. Don't worry if these aren't perfect or if you stitch over them in the next steps, because we can totally go back and fix them. Also, don't worry if you stitch right over your windows. You can see here that I actually stitch over the windows in a couple places. It's totally fine. You can stitch over it later. It just allows you to have an even more perfect straight line for the siding, which I think adds to the cuteness of it. But also notice that my lines are not perfectly perfect. It does not have to be perfect to be pretty. Just do your best. As long as you're enjoying it, that's what matters. Okay, next we're going to move on to the siding, and you can see that I've already gotten half of the siding stitched because you probably don't want to watch me stitch all of that. So as you can see, these are vertical stitches up and down, and right now I'm just touching up the half that I've already done, and I'll actually touch it up one more time before the project is over. So again, don't worry if at this point you're like, wow, this looks terrible. Yeah, it's probably not going to look great right now, but don't panic because you can see that mine also looks pretty terrible. So straight stitches right beside each other. We're technically satin stitching. Watch how I fill this space. So I go in and then my needle comes out right beside where it went through the fabric. This saves a lot of floss. Will save you so much time stitching it this particular way because one, you're not wasting a ton of floss on the back of the hoop, and you won't have to thread your needles so often. So I really recommend this when you're filling in really large areas. So once you've got your siding all done, we're going to go ahead and stitch the chimney. These are just horizontal stitches all the way down the chimney is how it's written. But you could also add guide stitches down the side of the chimney if you'd like. In this video, I used guide stitches and it actually made it a little bit harder for me than just using my lines. So whatever works best for you. Sometimes a guide stitch can be really helpful and sometimes it just throws me off. So if you start and you don't like the guide stitch, you could always just go ahead and take it out, but go ahead and stitch horizontal straight stitches all the way down the chimney. And as you can see, I'm making little corrections as I stitch down it, and that's totally fine too. So get that all stitched. Next, we are going to be using long horizontal stitches to fill in the foundation of the house. So you can see I'm using the same technique as I did with the siding to save floss. I'm just doing long straight stitches all the way across the foundation until it's filled up. And this section of the pattern I didn't trace super well, so I'm actually making a correction right here, as you can see. And then since I used a heat erasable pen, I actually went back and erased the pen right there because my tracing was so bad it was distracting me, which is the beauty of a heat erasable pen. So now we're ready to get back on track. Next, we are satin stitching the door. Same technique as the foundation and the siding to save floss, save time. So next we are adding the trim on the house, which I think is when this project really starts to come together. So we're using a cream floss, and I'm just using long straight stitches to frame the door, frame the add-on, frame the A-frame roof. And you can see that the stitches are stacked on top of each other for the roofing to make it a little bit thicker and stand out a little bit more. But again, this is just one long straight stitch, and this is what allows you to get that perfectly crisp, perfectly straight line. So don't worry about any gaps or anything. We could totally fill those in later, and go ahead and finish stitching your roofing and siding. So at this point we don't have the roof totally finished, but I am filling in the windows, again using satin stitch. Here I'm using 6 strands of floss, but if you want to use maybe 4 or 3 strands for it to be easier to stitch with. Next, we're going to stitch the siding of the windows, and this can get a little bit tricky. And my best advice is actually I would do the pane stitches first and then do the trim stitches. If I stitch this again, I actually wouldn't do it exactly like this. I would go ahead and separate out the window panes first and then do the outside stitches, but you can also do it the way that I'm doing it. I would just suggest tucking your stitches under these stitches instead of intersecting them, because you'll see that when they intersect, they just throw off the floss a little bit, and I spend a lot of time correcting that, but it's actually totally avoidable. Or you can totally do it this way and it still looks super cute. You really can't mess this up. And when you're stitching the window panes, just think about cutting the window in half, long ways and short ways with your stitches. And really just eyeball it, and you'll see that mine are far from perfect. And the original illustration is also not perfectly square. So it's meant to be a little bit lopsided and cute, and it definitely adds character. So we've got the windows done, and you'll see that there is a bit of touching up that needs to be done on the red. And you could pause and do that now, but I'm not going to worry about it because I know there will be more red used in this pattern. So I'll just do it when my needle is loaded. So right now I'm just back stitching a circle onto the door. This is just the base of the wreath. And I am using 6 strands for this, but if you wanted to use 3 or 4 just to make it a little bit easier, you totally could. There's no real way to get this perfect, especially because you can't draw a circle on top of your floss perfectly. So just do your best and know that no wreath looks absolutely perfect. Next, we are going to go ahead and stitch the porch. I'm using the dark brown floss again and doing those horizontal stitches, the same satin stitch technique that saves the floss. And I'm going to do the same exact thing on the step as well. So I'm going to fill in that little area where the step is supposed to be. Next, I'm going to finish off the roof by using one strand of the really dark brown floss, stitching a very thin line across the top of the roof line. This is such a small thing, but it makes such a big difference in the final look of the piece. And then also, while your needle is loaded with one strand of floss, you can go back and fix up any of those little siding details that you'd like to. Here's me messing up a little bit, but don't worry. In embroidery, you can pretty much always fix it. Like, everything is pretty fixable. So just fixing up this little issue here. And then I'm going to go ahead and touch up all that siding that I stitched over. Make those lines really pop. Now I'm going to stem stitch around the outer edge of the little pile of logs. This isn't totally necessary. You could just fill this area with satin stitch, but I felt like it gave it a little bit more differentiation. Here, stem stitch around the outside edge and then fill in that rest of the area with satin stitch. Again, using the same technique to save floss, just so you're loading up your needle no more than you have to, because this is quite a big project. You can save time and energy. I'm all for it. Using your light brown, add in these big fluffy French knots, and these look like little logs all stacked up on each other. I just love how this turned out, and the bigger and looser and fluffier the French knots, the better. So you can see that I'm wrapping my floss multiple times around the needle. This one here is like so good. And you can also go back and use the tip of your needle to like fluff up your French knots too, just to make them look a little bit fluffier and cuter. If you need a little more details on exactly how to do French knots, I do have a little tutorial on my reels. And so now I'm just adding seed stitches in between the French knots to fill out that space, but it's fine if there's some dark left behind, of course. It just adds dimension. Now I'm going to go ahead and stitch the leaves on the wreath. These are just little seed stitches all the way around, and then I add small French knots using just 2 strands of floss. And while my needle is loaded, I'll actually go back and touch up the siding where there might be any gaps. You could also do this down the line, like put it down and come back in a couple of days. I always just feel so nice touching up little places and making it really feel finished. Go ahead and add those little finishing touches if you want, or you can come back at the very end and touch up as well. But right now I'm just touching up the siding. And finally, doing the final touches by filling in the area where the smoke is coming out of the chimney. I'm using long and short stitch to do this. You could also do satin stitch or really any other stitch you'd like. And then I also am going to use the same technique to make little piles of snow around the foundation of the house and the base of the trees. This just makes it feel even cozier and even cuter, in my opinion. I just love this. It's such a simple little thing to add, but it makes such a big difference in the overall piece, making it feel complete, in my opinion. So I'm just going in and adding all of that. And then finally, with just one strand of my cream floss, I'm going to go in and add the brick details to the chimney and to the foundation. These are just simple little straight stitches made parallel and perpendicular to each other to mimic the look of bricks. It's so simple, and I think one of the most fun parts of the project. Once you've got that done, we're going to go ahead and back the hoop. You've checked, make sure there's no gaps you need to fill, you're good to go, then it's time to back. So I actually love to leave the backs of my hoops open, and as you can see, I'm trimming off the excess fabric, and you're just going to go ahead and trim all the way around, and then take some of your extra leftover floss and do what is called a running stitch all the way around. Basically, so you could cinch the fabric down in the back. And I like to start with my floss on the inside of the hoop and end with the floss on the inside of the hoop. That way when you go to pull it, it cinches it all inward, and then it's just really easy to go ahead and tie a triple knot in there and then snip any loose ends that you have. Your project is completely done. I mean, you did it. You stitched the cutest little cottage.